Well, welcome back to the Rice Report, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here again. We've seen a lot of great interviews on here. There's going to be another one here ahead of us. As you know, in this interview series, we bring on people who have different views. It's really important. They're pro MAGA, anti MAGA, questioning the narrative, following the narrative. It's important to hear all different voices out there. One of the more important voices that's really silenced in America is the voice of Europe or foreign politics in America. Our our media has done such a great job at brainwashing us that America is the only nation in the world that exists and that we're separate from the rest of the world, that we never hear about what's happening in Europe. So I quite often bring on people with a European point of view who are entrenched in the space, who live there, to give us a view of what's happening around the world, because not only is their view of what's happening in their countries and their continent important to us, their point of view on what's happening in our country is also really important. So today's guest, we're bringing on Peli North today. He is a former editor at The Guardian, a real journalist, travels the world. He's actually one of those guys who reports what he sees, talks about things with his opinion in there, but he is a factual person, an actual journalist. I will use the term actual because not many of you exist anymore today. Most of them are paid propaganda agents. And Peli's been through the ringer here. So thank you so much for coming on today. Can't wait to hear a little bit about Europe. We're going to hear about Epstein, your documentary, the Canadian elections. We're going to go through all that stuff in here in just an hour. So welcome aboard, Peli. Thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, I'm in Sweden at the moment, and I've kind of exiled myself from mainstream UK journalism. I was right at the heart. I was an editor at the Independent on Sunday. Worked at the Times and the Guardian, and then freelanced, wrote several articles for various newspapers, and then did a column for many years for a top science and technology magazine, and also wrote for the Lancet. But I think that I look at I went to journalism school in London. I think a lot of my peers, one keeps an eye on what they're up to. I think they're totally compromised now by the state of journalism in the UK. I mean, it's the COVID you couldn't tell the truth about, and then there's almost no debate in the UK about Ukraine, Russia. So although I mean this show I've had on TNT and the Pulse has been totally liberating. I mean, I've been able to talk to the much wider spectrum of opinion and expertise that exists in the US, and bringing it to, well, a mixed audience worldwide, but I mean primarily to Europeans, because they're the ones who can't get it from their domestic sources. I mean, there's a much bigger alternative media sphere in America. So when I find that a lot of the sort of bog standard criticism of America that comes from Europe, that America's a nation of burger chomping idiots. It's not true, but well, I mean, America has that as well, But
yeah, I was going to say there's
it's
truth
the best
in that.
of the best. America is the best of the best. You are the acme of Western civilization at its best. And what I found and on a show like ours, you say, well, we're based in Australia, but I'm based in Europe, and talking to all kinds, you get access to Americans because they're curious. They want to talk to someone from another continent, and so we had some pretty good guests on, and I was really impressed by the ability to marshal an argument, non-aggressively. This is my opinion. Americans are very good at selling themselves. So they sold an opinion. I thought this is really good. And people often talking about their constitution. No one in Europe talks about their constitution. No one knows it. So your rights. I mean, you're well grounded in your political. It made me believe in American democracy in a way. I mean, the American system. And you've got much more entrenched free. What I met when I talked to Americans, I found that you said exactly what you wanted. I mean, you were free to think, and in Europe we're not as free to think as we think. There's a lot of groupthink, and I know on the left in America, New York Times and all the boomers and all that, there's a lot of censorship and so on. But that was just my impression, that you're free to entertain every idea, and even though you go further in your conspiracy theory, I mean, everyone thinks, oh, Americans are the ones who believe in flat Earth. That hypothesizing is necessary, because then you can pull back and come up, because the truth is bigger than what the mainstream media says. It's not quite as big as the flat earthers, far from it, but its truth lies somewhere in between. So you've got to entertain the radical theories, and then you reject them. And there's a kind of openness and a playfulness I really liked. So I had some guests saying some stuff I didn't believe in, but I thought, well, hey, feels
Sure.
like an American country fair. Anyway, I was going to talk about, so I was very impressed. And I thought that if Europeans could hear that America that I've talked to and heard, I mean, that their characterizations of Trump are ridiculous, and the MAGA movement is so banal, and it doesn't do Europeans any favor, and there's a lot to learn there. So I just tried to bring that to a European audience, and I guess on the other way around, we can try and tell the Americans what's going on in Europe, because I think now the Trump team are trying to navigate the complexities of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and it probably helps to have some kind of. I mean, we're like 300 kilometers away from Russia here, you know, and you're thousands of miles away, which gives you an objectivity in some sense, but also lack of urgency. And one of the things I worry about is that Trump is taking on so many things that he can only spend 5 minutes a day on Ukraine or something, you know, whereas for us, it's existential. We think that we're led by a completely corrupt globalist elite who want more war as a way to. They went into this war not knowing the risks. They thought that they'd been persuaded by the intelligence agencies and their bought media that Russia was a pushover. It was the Russia of 25 years ago, where I worked there a bit as a young journalist, traveled around. It really was a ruin. I mean, it was like Germany after World War II. You could have a girl for a cigarette sort of thing. And I mean, it's just gangsters everywhere and all. But now I haven't been to Russia for many years, but just looking at YouTube videos, it looks as this really smartened up and powerful country.
I have a friend who just got back about a week and a half ago, and he even said, he goes, if I didn't already live in America, I'd consider moving to Russia. He said that they have cleaned it up. He goes there every year for about 25 years. So he was very impressed with the cleanup. I will touch on one thing. You mentioned the freedom of speech in America to be able to talk about anything you want. That is freedom. Like, that is where it begins. And we defend that very viciously here in this country. Some of us do. And the flat earth conversation is an interesting one for sure, because they did teach flat earth. But my opinion on this has always been the same. It doesn't matter if the earth is flat or round. It's screwed right now, and we need to fix it. And that's kind of where we go. So don't I mean, waste your time if you want to. It's your time. But my personal opinion is we have so many things to fix. Like in UK, there are people being arrested for social media posts. Just a post on social media about illegal immigrants. Like, this is true tyranny. Like, explain to us what that's like to live through. You said you exiled yourself from the UK.
Well, I mean, I'm located in Sweden at the moment, although I'm British in culture and nationality.
We couldn't tell. I thought you had I thought you were from Kentucky when I heard you talk right off the bat.
Right. So. I've got a Swedish mother, but I'm basically spent nearly all my life in the UK, and I'm kind of temporarily living in Sweden. And Sweden is actually less restrictive. It has, I think, the world's oldest press freedom law. And although there's a lot of social conformism, you know, Swedes don't speak out very much. I don't feel the same level of restrictiveness as I did in the UK. And some of the hosts on the show, you know, people like Basil Valentine and things, they feel much more restricted. So we've had these panel shows where I say exactly what I like. The American guest says exactly what they like. And the British guests are a little bit more huddled up, you know. And of course, there was these, somebody was arrested for swearing at a dog, you know, a police dog. I mean, it's that ridiculous thing. And then you have, I mean, two-tier Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has there's this talk about two-tier policing, so that people who are Muslim or whatever, and who are abused or who say bad things, they're treated differently from the white native population. So what happened was really I just think I think that it's wrong just to blame Keir Starmer, because it's a problem of the entire British political class. And the Tories, the Conservatives, were in power until 2024, July 20, and they've been in power for 15 years. And then all the Tory commentators pile in and say, "Oh, he's the worst prime minister." But I mean, he's basically not that different from the Tories before him. So they're being unfairly partisan there. It's a British blob thing, you know, like the British Conservatives are very woke. But anyway, so this two-tier Keir, he was going to institute some kind of two-tier justice system, but that's been pushed back now. But I mean, basically, the British establishment, the British elite, if you like, in the courts and the justice system and in the administration and the bureaucracy, I mean, they're very feminist, very feminine, very pro-woke. You've got to watch your words. I mean, I remember when I was sitting at the Financial Times editing away, and there was a human resources person, and that put a real dampener on any kind of conversation. You really watch your words carefully. And I think that's going to persist even after, for a long time. It's difficult to root out. And because the British have such good soft power, they're so entrenched into international institutions, they're very good at diplomacy, very good at intelligence operations. I mean, there was a a guy called Paul Thacker's done a lot of good work on how there's an organization called Center for Digital Hate, Countering Digital Hate or something. And that was run by Morgan McSweeney, who was very close to Keir Starmer. I think he's his chief of staff. And they were going to come to Washington. And if Kamala Harris had won, basically reorganize the American Constitution or do something to basically limit Americans' free speech, you know. So I think a lot of these organizations like NewsGuard or whatever, I mean, they demonetize so-called far-right organizations or far-right bloggers and so on, because it's like a badge of approval they have to give if this person, this organization or news outlet has the right views or the right factual opinions, but really it's just opinions that or facts that you don't like. I think the British were heavily involved in that. So I mean, they realized that to control the world, you've got to control people's minds, and they're very, very good at it. And I just think that, yeah.
Well, even the term government, when you break it down into two sections, govern means to control or to manage, and ment is a version of mental. So mind control is literally what government means when you break it down into two syllables. And from the other perspective, you know, looking at I still remember when they came out when the campaign was happening, where they're going to come after Americans for saying anything about the UK. The response on social media and in real life was hilarious. You know, like, guys, we have the Second Amendment. You know, we already beat you once. We'll beat you again. It's kind of that philosophy. But all politics, you're describing kabuki theater. All of our politics, left and right, really don't matter. It's the real people, the bloggers, the writers, the social media people who have these opinions, who hold them near and dear. Because politicians seem to get paid off all over the place to bend a knee to the other side while they're playing theater, letting you know they really hate what's happening right now, but they really love the mansion they get for making this decision.
That's right. I mean, there's that thing about people say, you know, put a jar of red ants and with a jar of black ants and they coexist happily together, and then you shake the jar and the ants start attacking each other. And the ants blame each other, but who's shaking the jar, right? So
that's exactly right.
This polarized political atmosphere that we're living in, Trumpists versus the left, you know, who's shaking our jar, who's in charge? And maybe they want us to be at each other's throats. And some of the immigration issues, I mean, could be, I mean, some of it is artificial, but some of it's genuine. I mean, let's say the immigrant, there's a lot of white native hostility in Sweden to immigrants from totally different cultures. And it's fine you can blame the immigrants for that, but you can also blame the politicians who bring in the immigrants that ensure that the white working class is at the throats of the immigrants rather than attacking the government and getting more, you know, union privileges or whatever. So you could say that the political class want people to be at each other's throats so that they don't hold the government to account, you know.
100% agree with that.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's been going on since the Roman Empire. It hasn't stopped today. The Roman Empire never ended. It just became another empire. The same people who controlled that empire moved to the British Empire. They moved to the American Empire. Yeah. It's the same lineage, they just give it a new name and a new disguise. That's how history really works. Now let's get into Ukraine and Russia, because about 18 months ago on this podcast, I said something that people thought was ludicrous, but it's true now. As I said, as soon as Ukraine and Russia starts to wind down, you're going to see India and Pakistan fire up, because it's like that time of the decade, right? Like, you just check your watch, and every 10 years, India and Pakistan fires up at some very convenient time. There's another way to extort capital. Military-industrial complex makes a ton of money. Politicians make a ton of money. And then there's new migration patterns that form from every single war. You're seeing Ukrainians flood Europe. You're seeing Russians flood Europe. You'll see Indians and Pakistanis flooding Europe very soon. Europe is already flooded, guys. If you think the migration problem in America is bad, take a look at Spain, Portugal, England, France, Germany, Poland has fended it off for a very long time. But everywhere in Europe is now flooded with Northern and Western Africans, Indians, Muslims from the Middle East. These are not assimilative societies. They're not coming to England to become English. They're coming to England to make England Muslim. That is a real problem, and it stems from us allowing these wars to persist. So the point of view in America is split. Finally, we probably have 50% of the country that doesn't want anything to do with Ukraine, and the other 50% want to give them all of our money and our youth to sacrifice. What is the overwhelming prevailing view in the UK and Sweden on the Ukrainian war?
Well, I mean, I'd say that Scandinavia, I mean, Sweden was neutral for 200 years, and it used to be, in my childhood, and perhaps yours, you know, the acme for negotiations. You meet in Stockholm as a neutral ground, and diplomats came from Sweden, like the UN Secretary General and so on. And the Swedes never took sides, and everyone trusted them and so on. That's no longer the case. Sweden's joined NATO, and is sadly one of the most. The Swedes got COVID absolutely right, you know, and they were demonized by the whole world. There were no lockdowns in Sweden. It was like Florida on steroids. No school closures. Nothing. All the restaurants were open. I lived completely normally while all my friends in London were staying at home. So they got that right. Then they joined NATO, and they've been subjected to a barrage of unbelievable propaganda. I mean, literally every tabloid newspaper every evening says that Putin has cancer or Putin is losing or something, when in fact Putin is winning and Ukraine is losing.
Yes.
And the British are almost as propagandistic. I think someone said, I mean, there's a guy called Alex Kreiner who thinks that the British economy, I don't understand economics or banking, but I'm starting to learn about it. But as I understand it, the British pound needs Ukrainian minerals, rare earth minerals, as collateral or something like that. You know, we're living with these kind of fight.
No, the British pound is a fiat currency. It has no backing. It has all national currencies, with the exception of Zimbabwe, have zero backing. Zimbabwe has money that's backed by gold, but it's down 40% because nobody believes they're actually backing it with gold, which will always be the problem there. So yeah, there's no backing of the British pound.
Oh, okay. Well, I defer to you, but there's something to do with that needing those more than just needing the resources, to, you know, to make mobile phones or to build up things, but or build electric cars. But there was some kind of financial aspect to it to shore up the credibility of the City of London. I have to find out more. That was one theory. And I think that there's a lot of prestige in Ukraine. I mean, the British lost an empire. They started Brexit. They were closed out of both. Americans didn't take them too seriously. And the Europeans bullied the Brits a little bit, you know, especially over Northern Ireland and places like that. So the Brits, my generation of journalists and diplomats, always had this special relationship with Eastern Europe and thought that literally the Russians were animals, and everyone had to be liberated from the hold of these people and brought to the West, which was so superior and brilliant. And it was like a life mission for many, almost like a religious mission for a whole generation of people who, like me, I lived in Estonia and so on. So they started to embrace the characteristics of these small East European countries who, lest we forget, have involved us in all these wars in Europe because they're irresponsible, they're fanatical, and they are totally obsessed with their particular perspective. Anyway, so Britain's been dragged in there, and I think a lot of those special operations, I think maybe even the assassination of the Russian general a couple of days ago, just when is basically, it's run by the British. The Brits guard Zelensky. Zaluzhny, his possible replacement, is sitting in London. There's a guy called Kit Klarenberg. You can read all his. He has all these explanations for why the Brits are running the show, and they're much more escalatory than the Americans. And even this Bucha thing, which was this alleged atrocity where Ukrainians have been mass murdered by Russians before they left outside Kiev in 2022, just as the Russians and Ukrainians were signing a peace deal. Well, that was probably a hoax, you know, as was the Skripal. The British MI6 deliver hoax after hoax the last couple of years, and everyone buys it in the mainstream media, you know. And they have that power of social control, anyway. So the Brits are there. There's almost no open debate in Britain about Ukraine, sadly. But fortunately for us, I think that the Americans are much more sober and they hold the whip hand. So you must not let yourselves be this. If there's one, I thought, what's going to be my takeaway message? If I could just say one thing on your show, do not be seduced by the British, because they brought you into World War I and they brought you into World War II, and that is their modus operandi. We'll pretend to be victims and then bring in the Americans, and they'll, you know, fight for us or whatever. That's it. That's what they do.
I think people oftentimes, like, researchers get it, but normal people who are just watching this, you know, working a job and trying to gain some information, almost every major event in global economics and history is orchestrated by intelligence organizations. They are the most powerful organizations outside of the bankers who finance them. We're going to get into bankers in Canada in just a minute. But I think it's important to understand that there are collaborations. So people will often say that was the CIA, or that was MI6, or that was Mossad. They're all the same thing with different labels. And Mossad's actual tagline, their motto is, by way of deception, thou shalt wage war. That is literally the motto on the buildings for Mossad. And one of them was taken down actually by Iran in that bombing in 2022. But there is a direct correlation between that. They own media, bankers finance everything. And in the Ukraine, we're watching a disaster. There's no possible way that the breadbasket, known as the breadbasket of Europe, can defend itself from the Russian army. That is a very formidable force, a global power. This war was over before it started. They didn't even use Russian soldiers for the first 4 months. They used the Wagner Group. So they sent in mercenaries to do their job early on, paid them handsomely for it. That war is over. Trump has said that war has been over for a long time. There's too many dead bodies. He wants it to end. We heard the other day that they came to a peace agreement, and then the very following 24 hours later, there was no peace agreement. Now we've heard Putin will offer a temporary ceasefire, and Trump wants a permanent ceasefire. What is going on with this? I mean, there's just, again, deception and war go hand in hand, but good Lord, these are really big swings.
It's just hard to know. I mean, I think officially, the Russians have said, demilitarization of Ukraine, no NATO. We keep the provinces that we occupy, 4 eastern oblasts, but also the land inside those territories that we don't occupy, which is very cheeky because they haven't actually fought for it. They haven't conquered those territories. It's like about half of the southern region of Zaporozhye, I think, in Kherson. And then I think denazification and so on. But I think a lot of that is actually negotiable. And I think that it's interesting. I was reading Trump's latest statements, and he says that Putin, I think they've struck a deal. I think they've been talking for much longer than we think. And I think they've, and I think they get on well. And I think that he said, I mean, I get on with, we've got a deal with the Russians. And I think that deal with the Russians is going to be much more compromising from the Russian side than some of the official stuff that's come out. And people will be surprised. But I think that Trump has to lock in. I mean, you've got to understand the Russian perspective is that from their perspective, Ukraine has just reneged on practically everything they've ever done, So they're like the irresponsible younger brother. You can't trust them for anything. They're lying about casualty rates. They brought in Western help in those 10 or 20 years. They reneged on the Minsk agreements, which was basically a sort of Canada or Belgium style deal, which would have, just what it was asking for cultural separateness for the Eastern Russian speakers not being bullied because the Russians lost their language. The Ukrainians were going to try and build a new nationality based on the small minority living in Western Ukraine. Anyway, all these things, and they reneged on that because they thought that Russia was weak, and their Western handlers thought, well, you could take on Russia. And I think partly because they wanted to tie down Russia after Biden had left Afghanistan. I mean, it's like Afghanistan Mark II. You know that how Russia was tied down in the 1970s and 80s. And the Americans started. I mean, Americans said, Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor, said, we're going to give the Russians their in Vietnam and bleed them. And that's exactly what happened. And that was one of the contributing factors to the fall of the Soviet Empire. And they were going to turn Ukraine into sort of new Afghanistan, always there, a thorn in Russia's side, with troops and biolabs and all these things. And this very, very fanatical and anti-Russian government, wanted to goad and annoy and tease the Russians all the time. And which I think maybe,
which is ludicrous, right? Like that is literally poking the literal bear, right? Right. Even biblically, people would say the bear represents Russia. People oftentimes forget that Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, was actually the capital of Rus before Russia became Russia. It was known as Rus, R-U-S. And the capital of Rus or Russia was Kiev. That is Russian land. It has been Russian land for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. But the fact that they are doing, and people oftentimes forget that this war was provoked by a genocide of 13,000 Russian speakers in Eastern Europe that asked Putin to come in and liberate them from the Ukrainian government. That is the factual trail of events. So the American and probably the UK media spun this immediately into, Putin wants to conquer all of Europe. No, he doesn't. He wants peace. He doesn't want more NATO countries on his border with biolabs. This has all been very well documented for the rest of the world. And I think we're going to see something here, but I don't know when it's going to break. But just this massive confusion of temporary, permanent peace treaty. We have a ceasefire. We have all this stuff. That signals kind of the end. Like you're getting, and I also believe that Trump and Putin have had a very good relationship for 12 years. I think that has been part of the reason we got Russiagate, because he was the first president who actually made an effort to befriend anyone from a hostile nation, which is how diplomacy is actually done. So I'm very supportive of that. Let's move in. And again, I will say this, I'll reiterate this. As soon as the ceasefire is signed there, I believe that we will see a onslaught of fire on the Pakistani and Indian border. who've always fought over the the water flowing down from Tibet. That's really one of the main reasons. But I think that we'll see that next. But let's move into Canada. So that's a big topic. Canada, the UK, very close ties. We actually have the first head of the Bank of England who is not English, and that is Mark Carney, who just supposedly won the election. However, that election had mysterious vans with pre-filled out ballots. The voting system went down. It sounds a lot like 2020 in the United States and the rigged election that we had with the second term for Donald Trump. And now you have a literal, I'm old, Pele. I'm old enough to remember when the bankers hid the fact that they run the world. When they used to hide, no, we don't run the world. Central bankers don't run the world. Well, now a central banker is president of or head of the entire nation of Canada at our northern border, and we're not hiding it anymore. What is the general consensus over there? There are strong ties between Canada and the UK, and you guys have a totally different opinion.
Well, I just say, I mean, Canada. The Guardian had an editorial last week saying, America has joined the dictatorships. You're now part of the Putin Iran world. Okay, we have to reconstitute the America. We have to reconstitute the West without the Americans. They've become a rogue state, and
we've always
variations on that theme have appeared in the Guardian, which is very influential because the BBC reads it, for quite a long time. And I would say you Americans should read that, because you think, okay, we know we're not living in a dictatorship. So the Guardian and the British press call us a dictatorship. Maybe when they call Russia's a dictatorship, that's not a dictatorship either.
Right.
Just think about it now. So they're now a large part of the intelligentsia, the bien pensant class, think that America is the worst. You're really a dictatorship. You kill people or whatever. And top of those old mixture of resentment and so on that they have, an inferiority complex, whatever. It's all, so you took a Guardian reader from North London, bring him onto this show, you'll hear all that stuff. Anyway, so Canada,
arrange it. I'd love to have the conversation. Arrange it for me. I'll have a conversation.
I'll try to. It's my few remaining friends of the because I grew up in that kind of political climate. North London, it's like, I don't know how you say, it's like Brooklyn or San Francisco or something like that. Anyway, so Canada is seen. It is. I could see the contours of the British Empire. And after I finish this show, I'm going to read 2 books that was recommended to me on Canada's hybrid identity. I mean, to me, most Brits can't tell Canadians from Americans accent-wise. I know if you say house, they'll say it sounds Canadian, right?
A boat.
And they're a bit calmer than Americans, but they're much less dynamic. And some people say it's because the loyalists left America and settled in Canada. So these were the ones who didn't have the balls to break free. They were the responsible one or the passive ones, and there is something more passive about Canadian political culture. But I think the Brits, certain influential Brits, if you call the Guardian, which is really like the mind center of the British establishment now, it does everything, it's woke, very anti-Russian and so on, they think of Canada really is as this alternative America that they can now control. And don't forget that when America was fighting its civil war, which was partly a British war, where they used the Confederacy to bash the Union because they saw America as a rising rival, but they also used intelligence officers based in Canada to apparently assassinate Lincoln. I mean, there's a guy, I can't remember his name, Matthew Ehret, who has this theory that Lincoln's death has British footprints all over it. Anyway, so
I've read the same thing. Yeah, revisionist history is fantastic. I mean, I would advise everyone to spend half an hour a week looking at the other side of a story of any part of history. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. Neither side is 100% accurate, but you have to understand both opinions on history. And I've heard the British involvement in the Lincoln assassination many times.
Wow. Okay. And the Russians apparently saved the Union because they parked their navy and prevented the British Navy from blockading it. I mean, I think we're living in the aftermath of the post-war British American, and then it was revived by Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, and then by Bush and Blair, this eternal friendship between two Anglo peoples, forgetting that for much of the 19th century, they were sworn enemies, and the Brits tried to squash and suffocate America before it became too powerful, and they failed. And then when they failed, they decided we can't beat them, we better join them or control them by being friends with them. And that's where we've been. There's a theory, a MAGA type theory, that you've got to break free from that intellectual control. Anyway, Canada, I don't know. I think that so I mean, Carney he's got a transgender son or daughter or whatever. He's someone says he's like Tim Waltz who won an election, you know, because of his ungroovy dancing on the dance floor. And then he's pro net zero, pro immigration. I just saw somewhere that Canada has the lowest economic growth per capita. So I mean, economic growth
of developed nations.
When you have a large population and it increases and you have more GNP, and lots of politicians say, well, that we're growing and we're doing well. But if you look at GNP per capita, that's what matters. That's people's living standards. It's actually slower, less growth in Canada than any other country, Western country. It's like zero. And they've brought in, what is it, 10 million people in the last 10 years. So it hasn't worked out for Canada, and Poilievre could have won on that. I don't know why. But as you said, maybe the election was stolen. I'm prepared to think that. I mean, there's evidence that the German election was stolen back in February. They're trying to steal the Romanian election. I think they might have stolen the Swedish election back in 2018, but the population is pretty passive about it.
Well, that's obvious from the crime stats, right? Like you can look at the crime stats in Sweden and realize just how passive the community is.
Yeah. Well, they've been invited basically. I mean, 2% of the or 1.5% of the population is the ethnicity is changing on that basis every year. So in 1 year it's 1.5, 10 years is 15%. I mean, it's a mathematical inevitability that Sweden, which is one of the most successful countries in history, hasn't been in a war for 200 years, is up there usually with America or Norway, is one of the most successful countries in the world, is becoming another country, you know. And
sad.
The immigrants are not exactly clever Chinese and Japanese. They're the countries from the lowest, the Afghans and Somalis, who have the lowest human development index. It's insane.
And they just invite them right into a civilized culture. Like, come on, they'll assimilate. They're not here to assimilate. That's just not. I get a lot of blowback on YouTube for my views on immigration, but I believe Americans should be American, British should be British, German should be German, Swedes should be Swedes. Everyone has their own country already, and I'm all for legal immigration of good people who want to help and assimilate into a culture. But all the world is losing its culture. What is European culture? What is American culture anymore? It's all a blend of multiple cultures around the world. And that has proven to be unsuccessful throughout all of history. You can go back to the British ties into Canada just by looking at their silver, their 1 ounce silver coins. It has a picture of Queen Elizabeth. When I tell people it is a British controlled colony masquerading as an independent nation, they tell me all the time I'm a lunatic. And I'm like, well, why do they have Queen Elizabeth on their 1 ounce silvers, right? It is a British colony.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said. So I think that the control over Canada is sort of a bit of a Trojan horse on the North American continent, and because the British, you just have to read what the British press says. They hate Trump. They really do. I mean, they talk about Trump in approximately the same language as they talk about Putin or whatever, and it's like, this man is a threat to our national security, because the Brits want American muscle and they want to control them. So NATO, they think that they've got power they leverage their own power through the United States. And so when someone like Trump says, I'm going to take back control, they don't like it. You know, so
is there a nationalist movement in the UK or in Europe in general? Like
are there
Trumpers out there?
What's happening is that you can see this kind of chess game. Everyone is or like a game of Risk, if you like, you know, where people seizing different territories. Now the globalists, or the Brits, if you like, have seized Canada for a while. They've got their man in, but the Trump or the MAGA or the Americans, whatever, the nationalists are building alliances like with Italy, Meloni, the Romanian guy who lost. There's a new guy that they put back in, and he might win, and he's a MAGA guy, and he's going to stop troops from entering Ukraine from Romania, because the Brits wanted to send troops into Ukraine, and he's going to stop that. They got, of course, Orban in Hungary. Hungary is a beautiful place, by the way. Lovely country where women walk safe at night, lovely food, lots of bright people, because Orban was spending money on buying up these think tanks, and for a global conservative movement. He's very aligned with MAGA. Slovakia. And then you've got nationalist movements in France and Germany, but I think the German movement, Le Pen was put in prison. That's the leader of the French nationalists. Some totally bogus case. Farage in London is being sidelined because they said he's a Putin puppet or something.
And of course he is. Everyone who they disagree with is a Putin puppet.
Of course, he's a far right. I think he's moderated some of his language, and they're leading in the polls. But the next UK election is not until 5 years' time, and I'm not sure. I think Musk was right when he said that Farage is not really the man to lead. He's not. I don't know. He's not really hard enough. There's no one who's as who's as dynamic as Trump. We don't have a Trump. I can't speak for the Continentals, but in the UK, it doesn't feel as if Farage has quite got it. So the Brits are in a really bad place at the moment. I don't have my finger on the pulse because I'm not there, but I mean, there are demonstrations, white nationalist demonstrations in a lot of places, and they're not covered by the media. There was one in Ireland at the weekend. I mean, Ireland was always like UK 30 years before. When I went there in the early 2000s, I don't know if you've been there. It's like England in the 1950s. And, you know, old cars, old style manners, lovely pubs, completely white when UK was already turning non-white slowly. And now it's like in the last couple of years, it's turning into, I don't know, I mean, a really non-white country. It's not the Ireland you've seen in the tourist brochures you might remember vaguely from 10 years ago. And so the Irish is that guy, Conor, that wrestling fighter that Trump's embraced, McGregor, you know, he's standing for presidency there. So the Irish are a bit more feisty than the British. I think something could start there, you know, among the English-speaking countries. The Irish should be among the first. Of course, they were fighting the British for many years.
And they were fighting themselves for even more years. So like the Irish like to fight. I got some Irish in me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a what is, apart from the smaller countries in Eastern Europe, and Italy is the biggest catch of the MAGA movement. There is this nationalist movements bubbling up everywhere in Europe, but they are at the moment being successfully suppressed. Like in Germany, the most important country, the AfD, you know, much loved by Musk, they were kept out of government. I think they might have lost some votes through vote stealing.
Yeah,
and they're not in elections for another 4 or 5 years, you know. So there was a host of elections last year. So we're not in a very good place in Europe at the moment. And the immigrants keep flooding in. Africa's 2 billion people now, expected to rise to 4 billion by 2050. It's right on our doorstep, you know.
Yeah.
Only a 10-kilometer straits between Gibraltar and Spain and the coast of Morocco, you know.
And they keep flooding every day. New boats arrive with 50, 100 people on them. It's every day. It happens every day in Spain. And then they come in through Spain and they find their way, just like the immigrants coming in the southern border in America found their way to all 50 states. They're doing the same thing in Europe, except they're landing in all the different countries instead of states. Same exact model.
I mean, yeah, and I wonder if the model was trial. I mean, they say it's Soros or something. Who is pushing it? I mean, it is the West's wars partly, and partly is economic hunger, if you like. I think, but I mean, the thing is about the UK immigration. I mean, there's, you know, I don't know, 50. I can't remember exact figure, but these people coming across on their dinghies across the English Channel. There's not as many as you think. It's, you know, maybe like 300 a day or something. It doesn't actually add up. It's only a small fraction of the people who come in illegally on commercial flights from India and Pakistan, right? So
yeah,
even, I mean, there's a lot of grandstanding against the boats, the small boats. We'll stop those dinghies, we're going to turn them back. Yeah, but fine. But even if they did all that, most immigrants, UK would still have almost the same immigration, which is about 1 million a year in a country of 60 million. London is 2/3 non-white now, and when I left, it was mostly white.
2/3?
Yeah.
Wow, I remember hearing like 4 years ago that it was 50-50. Like in London, the city of London was only 50% white English anymore. 2/3 now.
Yeah, no, I'll make a correction. I think it's white English is about 33%, and then white non-English, like European or whatever, maybe another 10%. So it's a little bit more than that, just to get it exactly right.
But they are performing noon prayer in London right now. So noon Muslim prayer happens in the city of London on broadcast speakers. It's like they've changed the culture there completely.
I mean, I said, I mean, I go to see my dad in Winchester in the south of England. I passed through London. I said I lived all my life there, but for some reason I've kind of stayed away from it. But I get reports. I've got a lot of contacts and friends in London, and they say it's really another city than you remember it. I mean, it's like even in the hitherto white areas, it's overwhelming feeling of not being white anymore.
Oh man, and that's a change in culture. Complete change in culture.
Absolutely. And maybe some of this, I mean, the non-respect for freedom, because Brits, after all, did come up with the Magna Carta, and John Locke was the father of the American Revolution. He was British and so on. I mean, a lot of those American revolutionary ideas came from the radicals in England, you know. But now it doesn't feel so. Some of that authoritarianism might be because it's an import from countries that don't have those traditions, you know. And all you need is couple of well-paid barristers. Those are lawyers, you know, with wigs, and they're very, very canny, and they'll write petitions and change the legislation, and gradually you have less freedom, and that's why you have this climate of fear in the UK. So I'm just trying. I mean, how can there's some wised up people in Britain who say, how can we import Trump, or what can we do to have a Trumpian style revolution? But
We're
there's
not
a
getting rid
very,
of them. We're
very
keeping
high
them.
barrier because the Trump's cultural effusions, just the Brits, rightly or wrongly, I say wrongly because I hate that kind of snarky upper class arrogance. It doesn't go. You need some kind of translation of it or something, you know. So
you guys need a strong people oftentimes forget Bukele from El Salvador, a strong nationalist who believes in making their country great, not worried about the rest of the world. We've worried about the rest of the world for far too long. And in Europe, you simply don't have that. I still remember in Nashville last year, I was at a conference talking with a bunch of guys. One guy there was from London. And I asked him, I said, well, how's it going with the immigration out there? Because we were having a political conversation on a rooftop. And it immediately him and another person who worked for a very liberal senator was at this table, and they immediately put their target on me because I speak my mind and I try to tell the absolute truth every time I can. And they were attacking me. And I said, well, how's it going in London? You guys have more stabbings per capita than we have shootings now. You have all these migrants in there. And he said, oh, I don't even notice. I love the diversity of culture. And then I looked at his business card and I was like, oh, he's a CEO of this company. I'll keep him silent, but he's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, so of course he's fine with it. He's living in a penthouse with armed guards at the bottom of the building. The average person going to the pub at night isn't feeling the same way. We have that big spread of the wealthy versus the normal people and the way that they live. America's no different. You have Beverly Hills; they're happy with what's happening right now because they have gated communities and they have private armed guard services. The rest of Los Angeles is not happy with what's happening. So. Let's move into your documentary. Tell us about the documentary you just did. You just did one on Epstein. You've got some information. You just did a great interview. I'd advise everybody to go watch the other day on the Virginia. I forget how to say her name. Giuffre. Yeah.
Giuffre. I thought when I did my show on TNT, I thought, what story? Because I got impatient sitting around and just talking to people. I wanted to do some of my own journalism. So when there's a break there, I traveled down to Holland and interviewed a woman who was a guest on my show, and I thought, does a story check out? She claimed that she'd been groomed. She'd had sex with a lot of famous people. She's abused from the age of 6 and so on, and upwards. And then she'd been ended up having going to these like hunting parties, and then spent time in like castles or estates or large buildings where there were these kind of sex parties in swimming pools, and she was then in her early teens. And then this had been filmed or photographed, and sometimes not. Sometimes, like two powerful people, a Belgian industrialist and another Belgian industrialist or whatever, and if they both know that the other is having sex with girls in their early teens, then they can't rat on each other. So it's actually a kind of cementing effect for powerful people, right? Rather than overt blackmail, although that exists as well, with the intelligence agencies film you having sex and then, ring you up and say, Tucker Carlson's talked about that a lot. He says Mike Johnson, various other congressmen, they have a list of files on them, literally, I mean, computer files, video files, and compromising stuff. Anyway, and she said that she'd even been trained as an assassin, and then she was, and I thought that's going a bit far. I mean, just because this thing is going on, doesn't mean that everything everyone says goes on. So I'm not done with it because I want more verification because it sounds so incredible. But these rumors do go out that there are these people, because once your personality has been broken by being sexually abused, you're more easily trained, to be some kind of assassin or something. That's the story. And there was a congressional testimony in 1995 where 2 young women said that they'd been trained as assassins by the CIA. Yes. So that it's sort of halfway there. I'm not satisfied because I want to protect my reputation, but certainly I got some insight into this world of sexual blackmail. And she said she'd been to these hunting parties where the powerful people, including the prince consort of the Dutch queen, had taken pot shots at girls running away from them. I thought that's incredible. It sounds like but then there's the British detective. For you American readers won't know. I think his name is Colin something. can't remember the surname, but he wrote a famous book on the Lawrence case, which is a big case in England in the 1990s. Anyone can Google that. He wrote because he was the detective in charge of that. He said, well, he believes it because he heard a lot of stories about these hunting parties taking place in a particular venue in the English countryside, and he went there and they said, didn't it look like what these girls described to me? But then he talked to some neighbors and they said, yeah, there was a lake there and there was a fence there, and then it fit exactly what these girls were telling him. So what I'm saying is that these things might go on, and it's an open question how far it goes on, but it's one of the stories of the century. If our politicians behave the way they do, then the fact that they're being blackmailed could be one of them. And this Jufra thing, Johnny Medmore is the former partner of Whitney Webb, who's a very well-known investigative journalist in America. She's been on all the American shows, and she wrote the definitive book on Epstein. And they pointed out that a lot of every single witness who'd been jailed, or every single person involved in the Epstein case who'd been put in prison had died mysteriously on suicide. I mean, including famously Epstein himself, except Ghislaine Maxwell, who was his procurer, and actually, by Vedmore's account, the more important of the two, the spider at the center of the web, Epstein wasn't even the most important one. And she is still alive, and she's in prison, and she might have been slammed with more charges and spent even more time in prison if Jufra had allowed to testify. And now, of course, she's dead. And then he chillingly said there are 4 or 5 other girls who are active in the early 2000s. A lot of them are trying to get normal lives, you know, they run horse farms or they have young children, and they might be targeted next, you know, because they still have a story to tell. And that's what he was hinting at. And that's what I thought was really chilling, you know.
Yeah, no, couple things. So I've heard of hunting parties in New Zealand, Australia, and England. There are definitely places in America where this has happened to elite human hunting. This is something that people will find appalling and say this is not true. But and I can't verify that it's true. I've never been there, but these stories have been around for quite some time. On the other hand, I just had Jason Burmis on here yesterday, and we were talking about Virginia and the suicide, right? So I personally don't believe it's a suicide. That's my opinion. I have no knowledge. I do not know what happened. He did lay out a very strong factual case about her personal depression and how a lot of her family member had been worried about her being suicidal. So we don't know what happened with that. We have no clue. I've advised everybody to watch that interview with Jason. He lays out facts very, very well, as do you. But I think with the overall Epstein thing, you know, the one thing I wanted to have and talk to you about this is a lot of people think, well, Epstein was an American. Well, he was a dual citizen with Israel. Number one, he clearly had ties with Mossad because he's the only prisoner to ever be accosted and allowed to travel to a foreign nation. He's the only one in U.S. history, and he traveled directly to Israel. But the Epstein files, the Epstein case, is a global issue. You have people that are delegates and ambassadors, prime ministers, presidents, kings, princes in that Rolodex. I personally am losing a lot of faith that we will ever know the truth of what happened in that. When we have all the files, we have all the evidence. But this whole Pam Bondi delay of I'm going to release it all tomorrow. She released what we already had, and it was more redacted than what we already had. And are people in Europe, everyone here, you know, there's probably an Epstein conversation happening in my neighborhood right now. Is Europe the same way, just wanting to know who this guy was and what he was doing?
Not at all.
Really?
Not at all. We're much behind you on nearly every topic. I mean,
Wow.
you know, yeah.
Even with Prince Andrew involved.
Yeah. Well, people, I don't know. I mean, they think of that. No, she was after all 17, and that's above the age of consent. And so that was almost like a limited hangout. They put her out there, and people say, yeah, okay, he's sleeping with a 17-year-old, and it's disgusting, but it's not actually illegal. But so I don't think that I think that on every topic that the MAGA movement has made such progress on, you know, the 4 Musketeers, Musk and Trump and Vance and Kennedy on sort of health-related issues, we're far behind you on our understanding of those issues. You've got to lead the way, and you're leading the way. It's like, because you're the most powerful country, you're the hegemon, and you're the cause of a lot of these things. But you, but you also got the antidote to it. So you're the country that is. It's like the Soviet Union was actually far in advance of in its liberalizing in the 1980s and the satellite states, and they had to push the East Germany. East Germany ended up censoring Soviet newspapers because the Soviets were saying things that, you know, you've got to liberalize, that the East Germans didn't want to hear. No, we're far behind you. So people are much less speculative and much less knowledge. People much more trusting of the mainstream media, and the mainstream media, especially in the UK, is very, very powerful. The Daily Mail, the Sun, these are very, very well established brand names. It's all very centered. You know, you have like local newspapers and you have the New York Times and so on, but London is like a machine of news, and everyone is reached by the Sun and the Daily Mail and so on, and they're very, very careful with what. So I would say there's a lower level of knowledge. Yeah, it is scary. So
That's scary.
you know,
yeah, I mean, with
and
what's
that's
coming
why they
down
think
the
you're all
pike.
conspiracy theorists, because you talk about this. You're half a generation ahead on these issues. You know, we'll catch up, but that's the feeling I get. And I think the guess that you might get, the Brits you might get on your shows or whatever, that's like a minority, because they're the people who know these things. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, I've invited plenty of British journalists onto the show, and they probably watch a couple episodes and just pass on the deal and don't respond back. Because I'd love to have them on here. I'd love to question them with factual information as to why they're not questioning the people in power, which is what journalism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a challenge to the authorities of the world to maintain integrity with the normal people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're all compromised. It's terrible. I mean, a lot of my old friends, I write to them too. I didn't invite them on my show. That's a lost cause. But I say, well, what do you think of the Skripals? What do you think of the Bucha? What do you think of the Ukraine, the death toll? And they reply in one line or not at all, you know. And I'm right and you're wrong. That's what I want them to say. But they'll never say that. And then they're getting their comfortable salaries and they're part of the establishment. So unfortunately, the area I know, British journalism, I mean, I can't speak for British engineering or British science or British cuisine or whatever. It's Britain is lost in the area. It's nothing respectable about the area I'm engaged in. British journalism. It's no place to be right now. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, another topic that just happened over there, Portugal and Spain have lost power. They're anticipating this will take many days to get back online. Is that a topic you're hearing about in Sweden? A fear that they
Yeah,
have in their
sure. I mean,
media?
yeah. No, I mean, my sister happens to live in Madrid, but she said that so I followed that topic a bit. I think that most of Spain has got most of its power back, like 80 or 90%.
Oh,
And there's a
good.
lot of no one actually speculates about it openly today. Thank God. But you know, I mean, I thought that they were going to blame Russia and use that. I've worried a lot about a false flag or something. Something's going to happen, and then they're going to blame the Russia, and they're going to go to kinetic war because the cyber attack.
Right.
So I would say, I mean, I was reading as a German, Spanish engineering thread that had been translated into English, and they said there's a 40% chance it's just because of the solar power and the wind power. It doesn't have that resilience that other. And I think all the hydropower plants have been out of commission or something. So there's an unfortunate combination of
Nuclear's
and
been out.
nuclear, all the resilient things. And Spain, 5 days before this thing, had the highest ever reliance on renewables in its history, like 100%. So there's no lack of resilience there. It's very sensitive. So they didn't have any backup power, and it's that. But that said, that largely renewable power caused event might have been set in train by some hacking that's targeted a particular network or something that set off the cascade. And so they reckon there's a 25% chance of somebody hacking it. But the main cause was renewables, over reliance on renewables. And who hackers? I have to say, the ones in who's interested is much more the Ukrainians, because they're the ones
That's
who
right.
want to drag Europe into war with Russia, because to blame it on the Russians, everyone is primed that it's Russia, but the Russians have actually no interest in this. And the Ukrainians, I mean, they assassinate people. And one of the things that worries me is if Ukraine does lose somehow, there are going to be so many weapons coming into Europe from Ukraine. They're very good assassins, very good warriors, the Ukrainians, and they're going to be very vengeful because they were promised independence. They were promised a golden position in the new Europe, and now they've lost everything. They've lost 1.5 million people. So we have sold them down the river in a way. We have used them, the Europeans, and at some point they'll realize that we don't respect them. We're just using them, and that we're not inviting them into the hallowed special West European group of superior nations. They're just East Europeans, you know. And they're going to hate us, or they're going to hate the West Europeans. So there might be that consideration as well, just revenge, or that they want to get us into war with Russia. But I don't know. No one officially speculated about it,
Well,
fortunately.
I'll say the speculation from the Americans' perspective, because we're professional speculators. That's what we do. When it comes to the Spanish grids going down and affecting Portugal, Official. I was actually on a Twitter space the other day with a grid operator, so he explained it very well. He's like, it was probably an overload of solar power being injected, and it was like 12 gigawatts of energy that shut it down. Very logical depiction. There's also the possibility of a cyber attack you hear. Unfortunately, that gets diminished quite a bit because power grids run on intranets, not internet. So they would have to hack that internal system, which has tremendous firewalls in it. Most cyber attacks that you've seen in the past 3 years have a fingerprint that all leads back to Russia always. Everyone should know that nobody is better at hacking systems than intelligence agencies, and no one is better at covering their footprint than an intelligence agency. So that's certainly a possibility. Another possibility that I think I've heard that is very logical is that this may be a way to impose the CBDC with more a positive reception in August, because Europe is slated to go on a CBDC format in August per the ECB. And that's a great way to do it. Like, guys, the economy's so messed up, we can't even keep the electricity on. If we just go to this form of money that we totally control, that you'll have no freedom, you'll have power. Many different theories come from this. And I want people to think critically. I never say I know for certain. But you should understand all the possibilities that exist. The one possibility I think we can all kind of throw out the window is the official narrative that there was some sort of atmospheric event that caused the power outage. Well, if that were true, the power would have gone out on the entire world. So like, just thinking critically about this. So it's kind of like the solar storm that took out like T-Mobile or Sprint for 4 hours. Okay, well, the solar storm didn't take out T-Mobile or any of the other solar providers, just Sprint. So the sun has this accurate way of just attacking one grid or one cell phone provider. These are all hocus pocus general narratives, but it's important to get that out there. Now, sorry. Please,
I was
please,
to say,
go ahead.
yeah, I'm just curious what you, because, and I think it's much more your area, finance and so on. But digital currencies, why are they such a bad thing?
Well, it depends on the digital currency. So a CBDC is a central bank digital currency. You have those. You have stable coins, which are basically run by banks. Will be run by banks in America within 6 months, but also run by private corporations. And what they are is just a representative of a digital dollar. But a CBDC is completely controlled and operated by the central banks. So it is a digital currency. You'll have a wallet. It'll replace all of your paper money, which provides privacy. So you'll have no privacy to begin with. It's a centralized system. So the central banks will be in control of your money, which means that, for you in particular, if you go back to the UK and you criticize Stamer, for example, you go back and say, I don't believe that, the Tories have been doing their job for 20 years, as you just claimed. They would have the ability to geofence your buying power. So a central bank could say, well, Peli's been a bad boy. We're going to allow you to spend your money within 1 kilometer of where you live. If you go outside of that 1 kilometer region, your actual money won't work. Or they can just simply say, you know what? I don't like what you posted on social media. I'm not going to arrest you. I'm just going to seize your entire bank account with no warning, no warrant. So when people look at central bank digital currencies aren't a bad thing, right? So you have independent ones like Bitcoin, decentralized. Everyone in Europe should be buying Bitcoin like crazy, by the way, and I don't think many people are. America's way ahead there. But then you have stable coins, which are just $1. They don't move in value. They're not really an investment. They just hold your buying power and allow you to spend. And then you have central bank digital currencies that are absolutely tyranny. This has been the ultimate goal of Agenda 2030, is to get the entire world wrapped into central bank digital currencies, trusting the central bankers of your country. Like City of London is with the home of central bankers globally. Not a single person should trust a word that comes out of the City of London ever. It only has
Mark
their interest in
Carney,
mind.
of course, was head of the Bank of England. Now he's head of Canada. So
That's
maybe
right.
he's part of this scheme, right? I think he's very much in favor of central bank digital currency and wants to introduce it to Canada, doesn't he?
Well, that's what they want to do, is create this perception that he won against Pierre, who overwhelmingly the populace love Pierre because he's kind of well, let's be honest, no politician, I don't care who you're talking about, is who they represent to be. They are all playing a role in a global theater to be able to impose either freedom or tyranny. They all have a role to play. But Mark Carney unto himself, I think that he was really boosted by globalists, because he will find a way to convince the Canadians that central bank digital currencies are the best thing for them. They've sold all their gold. They have zero gold in Canada. They have no buying power outside of a Canadian dollar. The Canadian dollar is as useful and functional as the United States allows it to be, which is why Trump keeps talking about buying Canada. It may be the only way to save them from total tyranny, but you'll find out that they'll say, well, he won by a popular vote. Everyone loves him. So I think his first agenda is going to be imposing the Canadian version of the CBDC in Canada, with full permission and support from the ECB and the Bank of England, which he ran into the ground. By the way, he ran the Bank of England into the ground with radical policies back then. So a tiger doesn't change his stripes, and I think Canada's in for a very rude awakening. And hopefully they'll be able to break free from that. But predicting the future is something I try to do financially, politically. No way of knowing. We have no idea who these people are. Well, all we have is what they represent to be. And follow the money. Watch where they take money from. Trump seems to be in support of Carney, and that may be from a business dealing. I mean, there's also a movement here, to kind of give you an idea of America. You have MAGA, you have Americans, you have leftists, rightists, you have all these different groups, libertarians, if they can ever decide what they are. I'm completely agnostic, independent from a political standpoint. But what I can tell you is even the MAGA crowd, who made a huge change in this world. I'm a huge Trump supporter. I'm literally sitting here wearing a free Trump T-shirt underneath this jacket. And, Trump is doing things I disagree with. I vehemently disagree with, making $5 billion on a meme coin as president, deporting Americans to foreign prisons. These are all things, the military being imposed on the southern border while the border is closed. They should have been put down there when the border was open. Now that they're closed, I don't want our military on our soil unless it's absolutely necessary. And I don't think it is necessary there anymore. But if you speak out against those things, then you're not MAGA anymore, right? So it's like everything is kind of gaslit in all directions. So Trump is doing things that I don't agree with. Annexing Canada and Greenland, that's very much a World Economic Forum plan, if you research the World Economic Forum at all. And because I say that, then I get ostracized by the MAGA people. And because I believe in most of the MAGA crowd, then the other crowd doesn't pay attention. So it's the same pinball effect that you're seeing in Europe with people who are pacifist versus aggressive on their freedom. I am a freedom maximalist. That is all I ever claim to be. I don't really care for politics. I talk about them all the time because they're relevant to money and they're relevant to your sanity, understanding what's happening. This has been a great episode because I love hearing the different points of views. I have been sad for Europe. I've been tweeting and posting about Europe being toast for over a year. That is my overwhelming feeling, especially with the tariff wars with China. You're going to have more Chinese influence in your nations than you had before because they have to make money somewhere else. I think that the politics in Europe are completely pacifist at this point in time. Europeans were the original revolutionaries before the Americans. They were the original revolutionaries. French Revolution. You have all these revolutions. That spirit of revolution, not absolutely non-violent revolution, but just cultural and societal revolution needs to take place in Europe. I think it'd be a great idea to get. I love that you're getting more Americans on your international show because that's huge for everyone. Getting more perspectives. I love having Europeans on my show. I think eventually we've got to cross the pond and have live events and allow. I would love to sit in a room with 100 random, people from London and let them talk and understand how they feel, and then help them structure a way to create some sort of a new website or social media, something that, Peli, it's just toast. I don't know, when you're being arrested for social media posts in the most powerful nation in the continent, what happens next? I mean, that's
that thing that we had, you Americans saying to the Brits, we had 1776, so we didn't have to have your 1984.
That's
so
true.
It does a little bit like that. No, I think that'd be great. I believe I've been critical of American foreign policy and so on in the past, but I don't know. I've become converted. We're all American in our culture anyway. I mean, I grew up on American literature, and the parts of London I grew up with, what was the difference between American and British? We were just reading them interchangeably and watching American shows and British shows. But I think I think now America it feels a much more dynamic place and much more interesting place with your ideas and with Trump. I'm a great believer in what the Americans are doing. Here we are fighting a 19th century war in Eastern Europe, and everyone's obsessing about that. And you're coming up with all these new ideas, all this innovation, and a lot of criticism, a lot of discussion about it. I mean, you're a generation ahead of us. I mean, the Chinese and the Japanese might be, but in terms of the Western sphere, and I think the continentals are even further behind. I mean, the Anglosphere, at least as the world's largest language, allows an exchange of ideas. So you've got to be, when I talk to French people, for instance, I find them surprisingly closed in. I mean, they're not part of the bigger debate, and so things move more slowly. But you are definitely, I think, world leaders somehow at the moment. and it's a kind of revolution, and it's exciting. And I'd wish that the Brits could learn from it somehow.
Well, you guys should let in some illegal American immigrants in London and let us do our job out there, because it's clearly needed. Everyone I've had on here from England, kind of the same expression. But people like you are at the forefront of bringing that knowledge or that awareness to your own continent. And if America's never going to shut up, I mean, that's one thing about us as people. We are always going to speak our mind. It's embedded in us. The culture of revolution is part of our DNA. And we'll take care of what we're doing here, and then eventually I hope it spreads out to Europe, because you guys need something to happen there.
Well, and I'm trying to interpret it for a British audience somehow. It's got to be, you got to speak the language, local language, in the sense, cultural language, otherwise that people might push away. I don't know. So I'm formulating a theory about it. I'm trying to work it out,
Well, we wish you nothing but the best on that. It's needed. I don't know if I can help, man. Just give me a call. I'll be happy to. I'm a little more blunt than your average Brit, but I'll be more than happy to help you out in any way I can.
Well, let's carry on our discussions.
Absolutely.
Right.
Peli, where can everyone find you online? How can they get a hold of you? How can they follow you?
You try the pulse.today, and that's where I have my daily shows. Is an hour talking to a lot of people from around the world, and then a lot of Americans. And then you just type in my name on Google. You find my WordPress. And that's got links to my films and to my books. I wrote some books about World War One and the origins there, dragging in the Americans. That's where I got that from. And then I wrote a book about a Swedish prime minister. And then I wrote a book about immigration in Europe. And you can buy those off Amazon. But the links are there. And then just some of my essays and so on. So that's the way to find me. You'll see the name down there. So just Google that.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great hour. Thank you so much for sharing what's happening overseas. Look forward to having you on again here and getting an update. Hopefully the update will be amazing, that Europe is now standing up for itself and making changes. And if we can help in any way, we're more than happy to do so. So thank you so much. And I wish you all the best, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Eric. Great to be on. Thanks.